Ms. Redmond, present. I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular person or corporation, as well as matters leading to the discipline of a particular person or corporation. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Can I have all in favor? And motion passes. We'll be back out at around 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the meeting for those who were here before. Can I have a motion to enter into public session for the meeting? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could we just have a moment of silence for Ms. Perrone, who was a special education teacher from Riverhead High School who tragically passed away recently? Thank you. So we now have the superintendent report. Dr. Torrentori.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. First, we're going to begin. I'm going to ask Dr. Asay to introduce our speaker, who's going to present on transportation.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have Micah Bradfield from Transport Group to give us an update regarding to the routing and everything else they have been doing in the district with transportation.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be with you all here again this evening. I'd like to begin by congratulating the returning board members who I've had the opportunity to present to in previous sessions, and in welcoming the new board members who are joining, whom I've not yet had the opportunity to work with, but look forward to working with in the year ahead. During my time as both a teacher and a district administrator, I can share with you that it's not lost on me that the work that we do in education is often tireless and thankless. And in working with many boards, I know that the challenges that you all face in making very difficult decisions to serve the greatest number of students is often a tireless and thankless role as well. It's also not lost on me this evening that the context of the work that we've been doing in collaboration with the district over the course of the last year is not context that many of the board members may have, as well as the community. And so I look forward to the opportunity to speak to what I know are some questions and concerns as we go into the next school year, and the changes that needed to be made in order to try to address some of the concerns that the district has been facing with regards to transportation over the course of the last 5 years. So if you will allow me this evening to walk through several facets of what are things that are impacting student transportation across the nation, but also challenges that are specific and unique to Riverhead. The work that we've done in partnership with the district administration as well as the transportation department to prepare as proactively as possible for a better start to the 23-24 school year than some of the challenges that were faced in the 22-23 year and in previous years. To talk through some of the recommendations that were made, the changes that were approved by the board last school year with regards to bell times, and the work that's being done this week in preparation for school start next week. For any of you that have been watching the news over the course of the last 4 to 6 weeks, you're likely aware of many of the challenges that districts across the nation are facing as they attempt to return to school and provide transportation services in what has been a very challenging context since the pandemic. We're still facing the worst school bus driver shortage in history. You're seeing districts who are rightfully so trying to provide an increase in the number of services, transportation services to students to improve upon the overall student experience with regards to enrichment programs and extra activities, but increasing the demand for service when you don't have enough resources to provide those services creates an additional challenge and layer complexity for transportation departments. Also inadequate staffing, not just in your driver and monitor ranks, but within your management and your operations staff, your fleet maintenance and technicians, where those individuals are not only being pulled to cover bus routes, but where they're inadequately staffed within the department as well. And then limited and inadequate tools and technology for many departments who either don't have the funding and or have antiquated systems that need to be replaced. And these are not excuses for transportation departments. I have the privilege of working with districts across the nation, and I can tell you that the majority of transportation departments are making miracles happen on a daily basis in service to students. But these are the realities that are being faced. And for many districts, in worst case scenarios, their response to these challenges are to cancel bus service altogether, to adhere strictly to policies that would limit their ability to provide service to the number of students that they've previously been providing service to operate in doubled or tripled up combined routes, which are requiring many students to experience significant delays in being able to be delivered safely and on time to and from school, to and from home. And only providing transportation to a select few, going back to what it requires you to provide, as opposed to situations where maybe you've been a little bit more lenient in your provision of service because you want to try to provide the maximum amount of services possible. And so those things, again, are not excuses for transportation departments, but that has been the response for many districts, to cancel service, to reduce service. Unfortunately, that's not the direction that Riverhead has taken. For many districts, the 22-23 year was focused on trying to identify what the challenges were and to try to be proactive in preparation for the 23-24 school year. And so districts like Riverhead, who have had a more successful start in which they're not having to cancel service, have taken the time to assess what the challenges were, to look at the resources that they had available in providing services, to assess what the transportation requirements and demand for services may be for students who are eligible, or program requirements that are being provided for students who need transportation. And their response was to try to develop a plan to enhance service delivery going into the 23-24 year with the resources that they had available. And I applaud Riverhead for the work that they've done over the course of the last year, the work that the previous board approved in terms of TransPar coming in to work alongside an incredibly hardworking transportation department who itself was looking for solutions, assistance, and ways in which to serve students at a higher level. I'd like to remind this current board of why we're here. TransPar has been in existence for nearly 3 decades. The work we do is with districts of all sizes, educational entities across the nation, literally from Hawaii to Rhode Island. And the work that we do is in service of trying to provide and ensure equitable access to transportation through responsible student transportation solutions. Last year, there was a challenging start to the 22-23 year in which it had been indicated by both the board and district leadership that they felt that services had been dealing with increased challenges over the course of the last 5 years. And so the goal was to bring in an outside firm to help partner with the district and to work alongside the transportation department to identify what the challenges were in an effort to be proactive in addressing and implementing change prior to the 23-24 school year. An RFP was released at the beginning of last school year, and there were actually 2 RFPs that were released, one in which the district was seeking the assistance of a qualified student transportation consultant or firm to assess student transportation operations, primarily looking at a route efficiency study. The other of which was an RFP to conduct an EV feasibility, electric vehicle feasibility study, with the district trying to be proactive in response to the state's mandate for school districts to move towards electrification by 2035. TransPar was fortunate enough to be awarded both opportunities. However, the focus has been and the priority has been on preparing for the 23-24 school year, which placed the emphasis on conducting the route efficiency study, and the EV feasibility study is currently on hold while we wait for further opportunities to partner with NYSERDA through a grant. TransPar began its route efficiency study in October of 2023, where we focused on the front end primarily on assessing the time and capacity of every run in the district. Time and capacity are the 2 levers that you have to pull when you're looking to become more efficient in student transportation. The other part of that, though, is dependent upon the number of resources that you have available to provide the number of runs that are required to serve all of the students that you're required to serve. In addition to the time and capacity utilization analysis, we supported the district in assessing its staffing, both driver staffing, monitor staffing, as well as its operations staff, fleet maintenance and technicians. We took the time to look at and evaluate the tools and technology that were within the department to determine whether or not those tools were adequate or presenting challenges for the staff in completing the tasks that they needed in order to be efficient in task daily. And worked overall to try to identify where could service delivery be enhanced as we prepared for the 23-24 school year. Trying to develop a data-informed plan that would allow us collectively to work together to address the challenges, again, that the district acknowledged that it was facing in the previous school year. It's not just enough to understand the context of the industry, though. Riverhead has to understand its specific and unique challenges with transportation. Riverhead is the largest district in geographic size on Long Island. Over the course of the last decade, it has, through its census data, increased in the number of people living in the area, particularly in the age category of individuals that are under 18. Which translates into increased student enrollment, and it translates into a larger population of people living in the area, which contributes to other factors. Traffic patterns in and around schools during prime work times, prime school start times, things that are external factors that impact the efficiency of transportation. But some of the internal factors are even more daunting. Riverhead finished the year last year 11 school bus drivers short, and that's not including the 15 to 20% absenteeism rate that could mean that anywhere from 10 to over 20 drivers were short on a daily basis, requiring nearly your entire operations staff to drive, which is pulling them from their primary duties to be able to serve the community with customer service, to respond to accidents, to respond to calls from student administrators, school administrators. So the significant understaffing in both your drivers and in your operations staff was another key facet of the efficiency of your operation. In addition to the challenges that were being faced with staffing, the district, and rightfully so, year over year has increased the number of enrichment programs, runs that are being provided to try to enhance the overall student experience. And those are things that transportation absolutely wants to support, but when you are a logistics-based operation, you're constrained by the finite resources that you have available to you to do so. Additional challenges included inconsistent adherence to either district policies and or state laws with regards to how bus stops were to be determined, where bus stops could be placed, the walk distances for students. Severe data breach in 2021, which prompted some changes last minute prior to the beginning of last school year with regards to the new routing software, but the department did its best to incorporate the information that it had available, but it was a significant challenge that impacted the start to last school year. Outside of other limiting factors, within the state, you're required to provide transportation to students who live in your area but choose not to attend Riverhead schools. Those schools have upwards of 25 different start and end times, which makes it incredibly complex in trying to group schools in a manner in which you're able to tier and pair bus runs together in an efficient manner. Those are not things that the district has the ability to control or change. There were conversations where possible with non-Riverhead school leaders, but many of those schools serve multiple districts, and so it's not a single change that can be made without impacting just Riverhead area students. And last but not least, when you again look at some of the complexity in terms of the size of the district, the area being served, the amount of traffic, your average route lengths last school year were 40 minutes in length. Average meaning that there are some that are running fewer than 40 minutes, but there are some that are running longer than 40 minutes. And to be able to fit those route times within the number of stops that were being provided, which we'll talk about the high level of service when we're placing curb-to-curb stops in areas where that may not be warranted, makes it very, very difficult to become more efficient unless you're willing to make some changes. So what did the data reveal as we completed the route efficiency analysis? One of the primary factors is that, again, you didn't have enough time between tiers. I think the focus has been on, well, what should the average route length be, or should students be on the bus a certain amount of time? The district does not have a maximum ride time policy, nor does the state. The state dictates in many situations that 90 minutes has not been unreasonable. However, What we see is that there is a necessity to acknowledge, again, the geographic size of the district and the level of service that has been provided by the district in terms of trying to meet the needs of students in as high a quality service manner as possible, but recognizing that unless you have more drivers or you increase the walk to stop distances for students or you reduce the number of stops on routes, these route lengths are what they are. Those average route lengths have to be fit into a bell time tier that allowed them to make it to school on time, and that was the primary challenge last year. Not that your routes were necessarily too long, because then the district does not have a maximum ride time policy, nor does the state, but that your route lengths were not able to be fit into the time that you had between tiers, which is why you had challenges with buses making it to school on time. So some of the primary recommendations that were made last school year first were to look at adjusting bell times. The reality is if you don't change bell times, you're going to continue to have some of the primary challenges that you were facing. One of the key challenges was with regards to your elementary schools. You had a staggered tiering of your elementary schools where they were not starting all at the same time. Many of those schools were releasing between the 3 o'clock and 3:30 hour, which was also the exact same time that the district was requiring 3:15, 4:15, and 5:15 runs. You do not have the ability to provide those runs during the same time frame when all of your drivers are on the road serving your middle school and intermediate school that are releasing around the same time. Again, the average length of runs did not provide for you to operate those runs in a timely manner and to also meet the many extracurricular and late run needs that the district was requiring. So the recommendation was made based on the data, which indicated that not only were your average route lengths 40 minutes in length, but that your standard deviation was approximately 20 minutes, which would indicate that at minimum you needed 60 minutes between tiers. That wasn't feasible, and that's for a lot of reasons. Many districts can't concede to an hour between bell times because of the constraints. Many of those constraints are based on how early you would like to start school and the earliest that you want students to be at bus stops, how late you want students getting out of school. And so those hard constraints in terms of high school starting no earlier than what it currently was starting and no school getting out any later than 3:40 automatically provide the backstops for the time frame in which you can construct your bus routes and construct your bell time tiers. You also have to meet the demands of your teacher contract day, which was a 7-hour contract day. You have to meet the state's instructional requirements for lengths of day. And so what was able to be developed was a best case scenario given the constraints, which was a maximum of 55 minutes between tiers in the afternoon. That was not able to be achieved in the morning. However, the data did indicate that a minimum of 60 minutes would have been a better solution. However, given the constraints, you've got to develop a schedule that is trying to achieve some of the task of alleviating the concerns with buses arriving to school after they are supposed to arrive. We also did a thorough policy review to determine what are the district's policies and where are we not consistently adhering to certain policies and or state policies. I can share with you, again, there's nothing wrong with providing a high level of service, but when you don't have the ability to add drivers, to reduce the time on routes by eliminating bus stops, when you're placing curb-to-curb stops and things of that nature that limit efficiency, it makes it extremely difficult to both provide the level of service within the available resources that you have. So we did a thorough review of the transportation policies, met with the policy committee to confirm that transportation could route in adherence to either state law and or district policy. Prepared discussions with the employee unions to make sure that they were aware of the work that we were doing, to make sure that they were at least informed, not to get the blessing necessarily in terms of what the final bell time would be, but to make sure that they were aware of and could participate in conversations with regards to making sure that we were adhering to teacher contract days in preparation of the bell time schedules, and then also in preparation for bus drivers and monitors to prepare for a new route bid as routes would be changing. And last, to work with the district to try to enhance the district staffing in the transportation department. This is, again, is a incredibly hardworking team who pulls off miracles every day, but we're very understaffed, and so a lot of the recommendations that were being made were to enhance and to supplement the transportation department in preparation for this school year. Some of the key milestones as we completed the route efficiency study in December, presented that information to the board in January. The next bit of work was to try to move forward in having Transpar support and supplement the routing of the department, as well as providing advisory through some of the key work that needed to be done with regards to bell times. We first met with the policy committee and presented all of the policy recommendations and confirming that those policies could be adhered to in routing for this next school year. At the beginning of March, we worked with the district through March and April to begin having some of those stakeholder conversations with non-public school, private charter parochial school leaders, as well as Riverhead school principals and district administration to start talking through what were the constraints for bell times. That process was lengthy. The start to Transpar's contract was significantly delayed, but we worked through that process as best we could to put together scenarios to review both internally with district leadership and to eventually present to the board at the end of May. The board unanimously approved those changes to the bell times at the end of May. And that started the route development process. Route development cannot begin until we know what the bell time schedule should be for the next year. So that work began in June. One thing that is not noted here is that the district was not able to roll over its student data until the end of July 28th, I believe. So the work that's done in between time is evaluating where bus stops can be placed based on the number of drivers that we anticipated having available. Again, reviewing and adhering what policies were able to be adhered to, and making sure that we are applying the average length of routes and looking where we can reduce that time to ensure that bus routes are fitting within the new bell time tiers. The routes were completed, and transportation can attest to this, earlier than they have been in recent years. Information was communicated to parents starting August 14th, has been ongoing since that day. We conducted the route bid on the 28th, which was yesterday, and had all drivers select routes, and they're in the process of completing dry runs ahead of the start to next week. All dry runs are to be completed by September 1st. So I'll quickly go through the rest of the information, which is talking about just the process, applying the new bell times to make sure that those route times are adhering again to what the new approved bell schedule should be. There, I do want to note that there were no changes to Riverhead High School or Riverhead Middle School times. It was the Pulaski Intermediate times as well as the elementaries that were standardized and aligned. So those were the two groups of schools that were shifted in terms of their current schedule. Going back again and reviewing and adhering to, where possible, state guidance and policies if the district did not have a specific policy, but keeping in mind the level of service that has been provided and knowing that you can't necessarily get rid of all stops that have been placed in distances that are less than what state and or reasonable district policies have put forth in previous years, but applying that information to the route development practice. Looking bigger picture, taking runs apart, and then literally putting them on the wall and deciding what things need to be paired together in order to improve the efficiency so that where possible, routes are not crisscrossing across the district. However, with your private, charter, and parochial schools, due to the fact that students can literally live anywhere in the district, that's oftentimes not possible to create routes that operate in a standard geographic area. So the overarching emphasis was to try to repair runs in a way that consider the geographic location of the schools being served, the length of the runs, their ability to be able to meet their next tier time in the effort to try to get all runs triple tiered to the extent possible, looking at the capacity of buses, your shared services runs that are required and oftentimes much longer in length, and then trying the best to meet the district's requirements for those shuttles, late runs, extracurricular activities as well. After runs are manually paired, they're linked together in the system to try to look at scheduling conflicts. And at the same time, one of the key things this year was to also try to put together more 8-hour route packages for drivers in the effort to try to recruit and retain more drivers who, quite frankly, are looking for opportunities to obtain benefits, to obtain a livelihood that allows them to survive on more than what many districts can offer. So I want to emphasize that the routing goal for us was to develop runs that were focused on getting students to school safely and on time. That's always the primary goal. To do so within the newly approved bell time structure, within the allowable district policies and state policies, and with the resources that you have available. I want to emphasize you can create a beautiful routing plan. If you don't have enough drivers who are the lifeblood of your operation, your drivers and your monitors, it doesn't matter. You've got to have the resources available to execute the plan that you'd like to develop. Seeking also to mirror as many Riverhead runs as possible so that you have that consistency for students in the morning and afternoon for their runs, riding the same buses with the same drivers, with the same stops. And then looking where we could to try to increase the resources that are needed to meet those late run requirements. You previously have not had enough resources because your elementaries were releasing during the same time frame as those 3:15 runs. Many of your athletic runs are operating in that same time frame, and so specific to elementaries, being able to standardize and shift that time later is what is freeing up those resources to address some of the other things that have been required by the district and board. You certainly can't do everything all at the same time, but transportation's goal is not to say no, is to try to respond with what are the solutions to be able to provide the services that are being required. And this was one of the key aspects of the challenges you were facing in the afternoon that was limiting your ability to both be at elementary schools on time and to provide those late run services. Riverhead is engaged in many changes over the course of this last year, and I recognize that the school year has not yet started and that many of you have likely received questions and even concerns about the changes that have been made. But I would like to remind the board and the community that this was done to try to be proactive. Everyone recognized the challenges that were being faced in last school year. You have a transportation department who has been nothing but willing to work alongside us to explain the challenges that they're facing with resources and to come up with a solution that tries to mitigate as many of the challenges that you're facing. And it will take time. The students, the drivers, the community, teachers, all of us will be going through this change at the same time. But I can assure you that the work that's being done was prompted by the district's response to wanting change that would improve upon and enhance the service delivery to students. I'd like to emphasize that the first 4 to 6 weeks of any school start is challenging. It's difficult, especially when you have implemented change. One of the key things that we see within the first couple of weeks is just everyone getting acclimated to riding the buses again. There have been stop location changes. There have been centralization of stops. There have been route path changes, areas in which buses have operated previously. That's changed. So that information will require parents, students, schools, the time to get used to. Particularly in the afternoons, it's going to be important that schools are preparing students to board the buses quickly, making sure that they're not being delayed at any level, because when you're in a triple tier system, if you have a challenge at that first tier, everything's a trickle-down effect after that. So everyone getting used to, again, the time changes, the dismissal procedures, but emphasizing the fact that in those first 3 weeks that everyone working together, getting used to and acclimated to the changes will be important. These changes were made to try to enhance service delivery. Where possible, again, we have worked to try to keep things intact that did not completely disrupt the system, but again, to improve service quality to students. It is important to note that where it is required through an IEP, curb-to-curb stops will remain in place. That's a non-negotiable. But there has been a certain level of families being accustomed to curb-to-curb stops in regular education routes that have lengthened the routes, and some of those changes have been made, and I know that those will be complaints and concerns from families, and I think that's important to note that that was done to try to improve upon service to all students, and that is the goal of the transportation department, to serve all of the students who require and are eligible for transportation. After the first few weeks, you do see a trickle up in some of the students who maybe their parents were taking them to school the first few weeks of school. Now they're starting to ride. Students are getting more comfortable on buses, so you tend to see an increase in student management issues after the first few weeks of schools, and those will be things that we are working with the department, that the department will be working with schools on. But I think it's also important to note the balancing and adjusting of routes. Unless you require a registration system for students who are riding the bus, transportation doesn't know who's going to show up to ride the bus the first few weeks of school. And so until we get a consistent feel for who's actually riding the bus on a regular basis, there will be balancing and adjustment that have to be made. There are places right now where we know students may not ride buses. Those stops are in place, though, because historically they have. If we go back and find that students are no longer utilizing those stops, then those stops will be removed, and that, too, can increase the efficiency of the routes. But until you require, unless you're able to require students to register, that the drivers are getting used to, who's actually showing up on their rosters. They're reporting that information back to transportation and the routing team, and those changes will be made as the school year continues to further increase efficiency after the school year is underway. I'd like to end the presentation by addressing some of the frequently asked questions, maybe questions that you've already been asked by your constituents, and not shying away from the fact that I know that these are difficult questions. But I, again, want to re-emphasize the fact that the work being done is to try to enhance service delivery to all students. And that's a difficult task when you have a limited number of resources, when you're required to not only provide transportation for your Riverhead school students, but to students who live anywhere in the district that may elect to attend another school. With varying bell times, and again, with a limited number of drivers. So why was a parent survey not conducted ahead of making bell time changes? Again, our contract start was delayed, and some of the tasks that we were required to do were pushed back. The time frame in which the bell time scenarios were able to be developed led us all the way to the end of May, and so at that time, the bell time schedule had to be presented to the board for approval before the end of the school year. And again, that bell time schedule was unanimously approved. We were given the opportunity to disseminate a survey after the fact to gauge from parents what concerns they had about bell time changes, particularly as it pertained to concerns with childcare. And I believe the district collected that feedback and made note of the responses from parents in the community. But that was the challenge in terms of conducting the parent survey. What improvements were made to routes? As I've mentioned, where stop locations could be centralized instead of door-to-door stops in locations where they've been placed that they're not warranted. Obviously applying the bell time changes to make sure that those new times are updated for schools that warranted change. Looking at and applying district and state policies to ensure that where we were placing bus stops or the distance between bus stops, it was not in violation of either district policy or state policy. And again, to enhance the overall service delivery of the route. There's not a specific target time for the length of routes. That varies by community, that varies by school, based on the number of students being served, the number of stops, the number of students in a neighborhood location. Why is my student on the bus for 40 to 50 minutes if the routes were improved? Again, the district does not have a maximum ride time policy. If the district wishes to implement a policy such that, let's say, my student should not be on the bus any longer than 30 minutes, you're absolutely more than welcome to do so. But that would require immediately the hiring of at least probably 20 more drivers, because to shorten routes to that length in the geography of the district, with the traffic concerns within the district, and the number of students you're required to serve both in district and out of district, it's not possible with the resources that you have. If you were to implement that policy, you likely find yourself in a situation where you would need to combine and double up routes in certain areas to keep students from being on the bus that length of time. But the other thing that reduces the length of time on your bus routes is how far students are walking to bus stops. So if you increase the walk to stop distance such that you're not making a large number of stops, you centralize those stops, that does reduce the time that it takes. But then parents are concerned about the distance that their students are walking. So there's a catch-22 in terms of, if you're looking to reduce time, you have to also be willing to implement the policies that would reduce time from a stop perspective. I think I just addressed the how can my bus route be shortened. Last, why is my bus stop changed, or why is it no longer able to be in front of my house? Education Law 3635 states that students can actually walk up to the distances which make them eligible for transportation to a bus stop. For K through 8, that is up to 2 miles, as noted by the state. For 9th through 12th graders, that is up to 3 miles. We realize that that is excessive, and that many districts choose to be quite a bit more restrictive in that to try to provide the highest level of service to students. In instances for routing this year, we've tried to not exceed for your elementary students distances of up to half a mile, but most students are far less than that. However, again, the district does not have a set policy on those walk-to-stop distances, and the state dictates that you do have the ability to require students to walk up to the eligibility requirements per state law. So I'll pause there, and we'll open up for any other questions that you may have.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Maybe we could put it on the big board. It's page 11 on your presentation, route development process.
Yes, sir.
So my question is really just for the high school and for Pulaski. You have arrival time for the high school at 6:55, and the start time is 7:15, and for Pulaski, the arrival time 8:15 and start time is 8:30. I guess as of now, are you looking at arrival time as like the earliest possible time a bus would get there? Is that arrival time where you figure the bulk of the buses are going to show up at that time?
That's the time in which we have spoken with district leadership in which students can be released. So that being able to target all buses to arrive at the same time, that's not going to be possible. But what we're aiming for is the release time for students to get off of buses where we know that there will be supervision to allow them into schools.
Oh, okay. So then the rest of that might be for Dr. Tornatore. Do we have an idea, because that's a long time for kids. Is there like a plan where they're going to, for the high school and for Pulaski? Has it always been that time that they show up?
For the high school, it has been that
The
time.
high school has, and what we're doing for the first time at the elementaries is we're aligning time up for them to have, the teachers to have time to meet and have professional development as well. So that's something that we were able to build in on the elementary level, because in the past, the problem was with all of the buildings with starting and end times, it would be very difficult to be able to say have a grade level meeting or to have multiple buildings be able to meet, whether virtually or in person. So we did want to build something in so that we were able to capture that time for our teachers to meet with the administration.
But what about the students that are going to be there at Pulaski? Like if they get there at 8:15, is there a plan for where they're going to go?
So in conversations with Mr. Burke, they do have a way to be able to have the students move into, say, the cafeteria. We do want to be able to try to get them in as soon as possible so then they can have their breakfast and to be able to, if they need to complete homework or anything like that, such as that. But the game plan is to be able to have the students come into the building and where they will be welcomed and where they will be able to have time in that location before they embark on going to classes as well.
Okay.
The discussion, how did that work out with our, non-public school and charter school? Has there been any changes in their routes?
The non-public and charter school leaders were very supportive throughout the process. Again, the reality for many of the non-public schools is that they do not just serve one district, and so to make bell time changes would impact multiple districts in the area. For those that could try to align more with the Riverhead schedules, they were certainly open and willing to be able to do so, but it was not something that we were able to push forward and force once we heard that many of them would have impacts to other districts. I feel like the conversations have been positive and have been receptive, and one of the things that we mentioned is that in the event that they are able to start those conversations again early this school year in preparation for next school year, it would be great to bring all of their district partners to the table to just determine, would these be changes that if Riverhead made for its schools and the private charter parochial non-public schools could also consider trying to align with one of the tiers for Riverhead, how would that impact their other district partners, and could we start those conversations early in this school year? And many of them I felt like were receptive to that once the school year got underway.
Okay, I do know that with the high school, the charter high school, there were runs going from everywhere, out, and that's out I think one of the furthest schools out east, right? So was there thought of like a centralized pickup so that, just at the high school, that they met centralized in town and then just one bus, heading out?
Sure, and that's a great question. The challenge with that, with your non-public school students, again, is that they can live anywhere in the district. And you're right. One of the easiest ways to create efficiency with regards to bus stops is to try to create a central location that creates density. Where possible, centralized locations were put in place for those bus stops, but it's not able to be done for all charter students because there are some that are, 1, 2 in different areas where you're not able to just create a centralized location. One of the things that I would share is that if the district was wanting to move towards a single centralized location, then we need to make sure to communicate to families well in advance the distance that that would require for many students. And again, by law, you have the ability to require students to walk up to 2 to 3 miles. However, if that's not what's being done in service to public school students, then you run into challenges with pushback from parents with regards to that as well. So where we could find opportunities to create density for students who, a larger number of students were residing in a specific area, creating centralized stops was done, but where there were other situations where students were, 1 or 2 in their particular neighborhood or area, those locations just have to have a stop created at a corner in relation to best practices that are being done with other bus stops as well.
Right, well, I was just thinking more like you had a student heading out to the charter from Wading River for high school, and another that's heading, say, from the Phillips area. So they're all getting their own separate buses heading out east. So instead, they're coming from the corners, like maybe it's one of the parking lots or whatever, so there's just, instead of all these separate buses with, a few amount of students, it's one bus heading out with.
And to the extent possible that students could be paired in runs that made more sense, where you're not having those lower density runs, that's certainly done. I think the challenge, though, is with regards to where some of the buses are coming from in earlier tiers or later tiers, depending on the morning and afternoon run. That really is dependent upon, again, where the students are located, where buses are operating from. But to the greatest extent possible, those students were centralized and tried to maximize the density of students such that you're maximizing both the time and the capacity on each of your runs.
Okay. I just know that, especially at the end of the day, just being able to do that turnaround, we had to have buses go out east, and then we still didn't have, like, say, 3 o'clock buses anyway, that we can kind of combine even some of those students, and they met up at the high school and got some of the 3:15 pickups and 4. I mean, I just recall that's when Mercy was open, that's what those students, some of my own children experienced, where they just waited at Pulaski for the Pulaski students, and that was a way to condense runs. And like I said, we only have a certain amount of drivers. So I was wondering if that was looked into. It could be down the road.
Absolutely.
Or maybe we're finding that with what's been done, that we will have enough.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to note too that we're seeing increases in some of the requests for some of the non-Riverhead schools. So the total number of students that are enrolling in the non-public schools is also increasing as well. So that some of the density concerns are being alleviated by the fact that you're simply having more students that are enrolling in these programs, which will fill some of those buses. But absolutely, we will continue to look at efficiency as the school year starts, but one of the key things is, where possible, trying to create the greatest density for students, repairing those runs in a manner that allows them to not have to crisscross the district necessarily, creating the most efficient path forward for those students. And I can assure you that where we can continue to consolidate routes, if possible, we're going to have to, because the reality is, while you've got enough drivers starting this school year, it's still not enough.
Right.
The reality is that for the 83 routes that you have and the 85 drivers that are present, those 2 sub-drivers will be pulled immediately to help cover routes. As soon as you start having absenteeism and cold and flu season kicks in, that absenteeism plus the extracurricular athletic activities, that's already not enough. And a lot of times the misconception from districts is that, okay, well, we have 83 routes, we need 83 drivers. No, you don't. You need upwards of 100 drivers to account for the peak field trip and extracurricular activities, to again account for your absenteeism rate on any given day, as well as your attrition rate, because the reality is that you're losing drivers. And so if you're only aiming at the total number of drivers that you need, which this department is not, they're working tirelessly to try to fill additional positions as much as they can, but if you're aiming at just the total number of home to school routes as your target for drivers, you're already behind. And so where there are opportunities, particularly in balancing and adjusting routes after the start of the school year, looking at places where maybe students are not riding, looking at places where we need to adjust stop placement because we're seeing a greater number of students in another area. Again, centralizing stop locations, that work will be done. But again, most transportation departments, unless they require a registration process for their general education students in a public school setting, don't know which students are actually going to show up to ride. We can hold the spot for students who are eligible to ride, but until we get hard data for this school year to see who's actually showing up to bus stops, it makes it difficult to try to reduce and further consolidate, because it's much easier to reduce after the fact with the resources that you have, as opposed to trying to add and not having enough bus stops and enough drivers and routes to serve students from the beginning of the year.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well.
I have a question about the extracurricular buses, especially at the elementary level. With the elementary schools ending later now, I see that when the clubs go out, the busing of those students may conflict with the sports buses at the high school and middle school times. I just want to make sure that that's being planned for and that we're not having to reduce the amount of extracurricular activities at elementary schools now because they won't be busing for the extra, for those getting those kids home because they can't be on the same buses, as the high school, middle school students.
Right, so we're, as far as the planning for the way that route packages were put together this year, we were able to add some of those late runs directly to the route packages so that drivers know from the beginning of the year what those late runs, what those enrichment activities are. There have been no talk of reductions for any sort of service for extracurricular late bus activities. It really has been a focus on this year, trying to start the year with enough resources to meet those needs, where in previous years, and again, that's where the challenge, and I know that there's been some concern with the adjustment to elementary school schedule, but that was part of the adjustment of the bell schedules for the elementary to try to free up available resources in a way that allowed the transportation department to also meet the needs of those late bus and extracurricular runs. So there has not been a talk of reducing that effort. It's been a focus on trying to increase the number of resources available to meet the late bus, the enrichment activities, those after-school programs that have historically been very constrained by the number of schools that were releasing between that 3 o'clock and 3:30 hour.
Yes, thank you.
I would like to thank you for acknowledging our transportation department and their willingness to work with you and to adapt to a very challenging situation. I have spoken to some parents who've called transportation in the past 2 weeks, and they have been met with professionalism, kindness, and expedited responses. So thank you to our transportation department. I'd like to if you could walk us through a little bit what will there be a post survey? What will your analysis entail once this is implemented fully, and what does the data collection look like? Will you be doing a post-survey for students and parents to see where some of those inefficiencies still remain?
Absolutely. So as far as the parent survey is concerned, we operate at the direction of the board and the district. If a parent survey is now being requested after school start, we'd be happy to conduct that. As far as our standard practices, we conduct what we call a route yield, which is part of what we did last year to assess the time and capacity of runs. And we would conduct that likely in middle of October, end of October, in which we're looking for any runs that are underutilized by 60% in time and capacity, which tells us immediately where there may be opportunities for further efficiency or maybe slack in the system that can be reduced. So from an analysis standpoint, we would go through the same exact process, having implemented new bell time changes, having applied the policies where possible, looking at how school operations have now settled, and we've balanced and adjusted routes, going through the same process of collecting actual driver information in the field, not what was planned in the system. And that's an important part to know, is that you have a route plan that's executed in development in the system, but what drivers are actually facing in the field, traffic challenges, construction, we need to take a single snapshot of that information on a given day in which drivers report back the times that they're making to their first stop, the number of students that they're collecting. We put that back into a proprietary system which immediately allows us to analyze those runs which are underutilized in time and capacity, and then we move forward in trying to further enhance efficiency as we prepare for the start of the second semester. And so that work, again, will begin after the probably first 4 to 6 weeks. We want things to settle settle in, because a lot of things do change and fluctuate within those first few weeks of the school year. But we would work directly with the transportation department and the drivers in collecting their ridership counts and information to further analyze the routes to determine, okay, where are we now seeing further opportunities to enhance efficiency in preparation for the end of the school year and in preparation for next school year.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ms. Brassfield.
Thank you.
Yes. Ms. Rosfield, I do want to thank you and your team for all the work that you've done. I certainly echo what was shared about the transportation department. They work very hard. I want to thank Mr. Moore and his team for all that they've done, and our bus drivers and everybody in the transportation office as well. So thank you all. A few items that I do want to share with the board and with the community. First of all, we have been conducting residency checks of students who we believed were not residents in the district. I'm happy to report that we've had several students that have been removed who are not district residents. So that is a savings to the district, and I'm appreciative of the PPS department for performing those residency checks for students. In addition to the survey that will go out in approximately mid-October from Transport, there's a few other things I wanted to share. I had reached out to Teachers Federal Credit Union, and it is on the agenda tonight. They did provide a van full of school supplies, and Mr. Palmer and I were happy to receive those supplies, and they were distributed to all 7 buildings. So I do want to thank Teachers Federal for providing these supplies for our students. We also held our New Professionals Institute this week, and tomorrow is the last day for that. I do want to thank Dr. Kerner as well as Tammy Michelson for all the work that they've done with the New Professionals Institute for our new teachers who have become Blue Road members. I was able to attend the August graduation for our Riverhead High School students. We had 20 students who graduated, so I'm very proud of their accomplishments in being able to graduate. And I do want to thank Mr. Palmer and Ms. Healy for attending that as well. I had the pleasure of today attending the freshman orientation that was run by the high school, and it was great to see the incoming freshmen, and how excited they are coming into the high school. And lastly, I would be remiss if I also didn't thank our clerical and custodial team for all the work that they have done this summer and that they do throughout the year, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be in the place that we are. So I wanted to thank them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Tornatore. Any questions or comments from other board members concerning the report?
Well, just, I was grateful to be invited to that August graduation. That's the first. And, and they brought out speakers. They had it decorated. It was a very meaningful ceremony. And those students just, deserve that. And hopefully it will be encouraging that, everyone has different, everyone's journey is a little different, right? And that it'll culminate in, a ceremony that we recognize, their achievement, and maybe other students that will be finding themselves in that same situation will know that it's worth the effort, and that we're going to be there for them to see them through and to congratulate them and to celebrate with them. So just thank you to the staff, Dina Tisham and the principal, Stephen Vielle, and everybody. I'm not going to be able to remember his name, but they really did a beautiful job, and the speakers, and especially that English teacher. He was very, very good. I forget his name, but sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Healy. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to public comment on agenda items. Are there any public comments? Do you have any online comments? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Oh, we do have one, sorry.
Good evening. I have already addressed my concerns in an email to Mr. Tornatore, and came here to listen to the presentation about transportation and all the students that are entitled to it. But what I did not hear is how the law 3635 also entitles pre-K students to the same transportation that everyone else gets in the district. And I was just wondering if that's ever going to be considered, why it was not brought up, or maybe the district just didn't even consider making that a thing in their plans for making this transportation thing work. So I was just wondering where that stands and why that wasn't addressed at all.
Would you mind just sharing your name for the record?
Courtney,
Courtney, and your last name?
I don't want to get my last
No,
name.
that's fine.
Thank you.
To respond, I am actually meeting with members of the State Education Department on Thursday to have that conversation. We have tried to explore and look at options where we would be able to offer the UPK transportation and see how that would work out. It's been extremely difficult to be able to make that a reality. So I am going to, I initiated a reach out to State Ed so that we could have a conversation to see how we could try to mitigate and resolve this. And I should hopefully have more information. If you'd like to, please reach out to my office after Thursday, then I could speak with you about a follow-up.
Okay, but this was not addressed in the plan at all, obviously, when they came in to look at the overall districts, obviously, right? It was not in her presentation at all. So is it only being considered now that people are making it a concern, or was it a concern always?
This has always been a concern, and certainly we've been trying to take a look at different possible options that could work, and we've been met with dead ends regarding those possible options. So that's why I am reaching out to State Ed so that we could have a conversation and see what other possibilities we could have, and also through State Ed, what guidance they could provide for us with this, because it is something that we do take very seriously, and we certainly want to be able to meet the needs of our students and families in the district.
Well, I thank you for that. I obviously see the challenges, but to take the time to consider everyone that is entitled to transportation, means a lot, so thank you.
Any other comments on consent agenda or on our agenda?
Hello, Sonia Johnson, CSEA President.
Peter Brown, Vice President.
We just wanted to just share, yesterday morning, we went to transportation. They were doing their run picks, and I just want to comment on letting his staff, everything was very well organized. We're there to watch and make sure that everybody is treated fairly, and they were walking into this, different runs that they're not used to, and we thought it was going to be like something different, but it actually ran very smoothly, and I just wanted to compliment Eric, his office staff, everybody did very well, and it was the smoothest I've seen, and I'm hopeful for the year coming. Peter?
Yes, everything. So I actually worked at transportation the whole summer. So Eric is new. Let actually brought Eric in and was showing him the ropes. The time that I was there, they all did a great job. They actually wanted the union's input as far as things that they was looking to do. So everything worked out fine, and yesterday was a great day.
Just wanted to share that with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to consent agenda. Can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Redmond. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Moving on to new business. Letter A, the approval of 2022 to 2023 final AS7 BOCES service contract. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Scudder. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes. Letter B, approval of cross contracts. These are contracts with Western Suffolk BOCES and Franklin Essex Hamilton BOCES for accounting and planning. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Any questions or comments?
Maybe Dr. Tornatore can just explain why 22, 23 are on now. I mean, these were contracts that, services that we've already had, and we're just cleaning up for the BOCES contract.
Absolutely. So through contract modifications, we were able to secure these services, and we wanted to make sure that it was placed on the agenda for board approval and transparency purposes and sharing out with the community as well.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter C, amendment to appointment of impartial hearing officers. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Redmond. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion,
No, I'm
You're
just
using
like,
it for an answer.
as I'm scrolling
Motion-
down, the
motion
hand's taking
passes.
all the time.
Letter D, approval of memorandum of agreement with RAA. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter E, approval of memorandum of agreement with Suffolk County Community College. This is specifically about using Suffolk County Community College as our location and in a case of an emergency where off-campus evacuations would have to take place. Can I have a motion?
Motion?
Motion, thank you, Ms. Murphy. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Redmond. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter F, approval of funding reserves. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you both. Any questions or comments? No, seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes. Letter G, approval of contracts. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion, thank you, Ms. Healy. Can I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter H, approval of Amtech Energy Systems LLC contract. Can I have a motion?
Motion?
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter I, approval of special education services contracts. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter J, approval of amendment to 2023-2024 salary schedule for non-contracted employees. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Redmond. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter K, approval of memorandum of agreement with CSEA member. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Scudder. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion passes. Letter L, approval of EBALR. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion. Thank you, Ms. Healy. Can I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes. And letter M, acceptance of donations. This includes that donation from Teachers Federal Credit Union that Dr. Tornatore had mentioned. There's also office cubicles from the IT department and teachers' desks from the town of Riverhead, since the town has purchased the former Suffolk County National Bank building on 2nd Street. They've been excising items and donated some to the town. And then finally, $2,240 from the Montauk Surfcasters Association in cooperation with Onto the Docks Restaurant and Lighthouse Marine Supply for the purpose of sponsoring a fishing club with the Riverhead High School. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion, thank you, Ms. Murphy. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Redmond. Any questions or comments?
No, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. All in favor? And motion passes. Opportunity for board members. Do we have any committee reports? I believe so. Do we have any board member comments? Nope. Seeing none, let's move on to, oh, yeah.
I was just saying, good year, have a good year.
I just want to see if we can set up another facilities committee meeting just to talk about the EPC, on how that's moving along. If we can just get that set up, please, thank you.
Oh, thanks for reminding me. I know that we had talked with Health and Safety Committee, and I know we're meeting, but we were going to include some student reps. I don't know if they were, maybe they'd be in the school year to identify, because I know that was something that they were speaking at the podium about, and be able to have a voice, and especially with safety and other things within the school. So I think you would have to, reach out to the principal and find out.
I'd like to wish all the teachers, administrators, and students a good start of the year next week.
Right.
All right, so let's move on to opportunity for RCFA.
Good evening, Gregory Wallace, Riverhead Central Faculty Association President and a Riverhead resident. It is with a heavy heart that I stand here tonight to remember Victoria Perone. It is impossible to adequately quantify what Victoria meant to our students, the RCFA, and this district. The 7-hour day just did not apply to Victoria. She was one of the first teachers to pull in the parking lot in the morning, and usually one of the last teachers to leave the building each day. Her knowledge of special education law made her uniquely qualified to advocate for both teachers and students alike. Her work ethic and tireless dedication to our school community is a legacy for all of us to uphold. Thank you.
Opportunity for RAA. Do we have a raw comment today? So we have an opportunity for public comment. Are there any public comments? Any general comments? Seeing none, do you have any online comments? Seeing none. All right. I'd like to make a motion to recess back into executive session to discuss the particular employment of a person. Can I have a motion? Motion. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Can I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Any questions or comments? We'll end out there. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And motion carries. So we'll be finishing the meeting in executive session. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you in the beginning of the school year.